The dust in the air tasted like copper. It coated everything, my boots, my rifle, and even my teeth. I was sitting in the dim, flickering light of the operations tent, taking a rare moment to breathe. It was 2 in the morning, and while the rest of the base was asleep, my laptop screen glowed in the darkness. We were 6,000 miles from home, in a remote sector where the internet was a luxury. Suddenly, a notification pinged on my screen. It wasn't a tactical alert. It wasn't a message from command. It was an automated email from my bank. Mortgage payment, overdue. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. That was impossible. I am a man of routine. I automate everything to ensure my life runs smoothly while I am away. My name is Torin. I am 34 years old, a master sergeant in the Air Force with 15 years of dedicated service. I manage logistics for multi-million-dollar operations. I check every detail 3 times before I make a single move. I am never late, and I never miss a payment. A cold feeling settled in my stomach, heavier than the combat gear I wore every day. I tried to dismiss it as a system error, a glitch in the banking software. But as I stared at that red text, my military intuition kicked in. Something was wrong. I clicked the link to the bank's portal, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The air conditioner in the tent rattled loudly, but the sound seemed miles away. I logged into our joint bank account. I had set this account up specifically for this deployment. My hazard pay, my per diem, my base salary, it all went there. Before I left, I had given my wife, Parisa, power of attorney. This meant she had full legal access to our finances. I did it because I trusted her with my life, and by extension, my livelihood. The page loaded slowly on the lagging satellite connection. When the numbers finally appeared, I stopped breathing. The balance wasn't growing. It wasn't even steady. It read $112.38. I stared at the screen, blinking rapidly, hoping my tired eyes were deceiving me. I refreshed the page. Still $112.38. 8 months of deployment pay. Tens of thousands of dollars. The money meant for our future, for our retirement, and for the home renovations we had planned together. It was all gone. My hands clenched into fists. I wasn't rich, but I had saved aggressively. That account should have been bursting with funds. Instead, it was empty. The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust one had handed over so easily, now shattered on a screen in a dusty tent. My hands started to shake. It wasn't fear. It was a cold, sharp shock that quickly turned into focused anger. I clicked on the transaction history tab. I expected to see maybe a medical emergency I didn't know about, or perhaps a car repair that cost a fortune. I scrolled past the normal grocery bills and the utility payments. Then I saw it. A transfer. Then another. Then another. Every single month, on the first, a massive sum was leaving the account. $4,000. The recipient wasn't a hospital, a mechanic, or a contractor. The line item simply read, "Outgoing transfer, Pinnacle Horizon LLC." I had never heard of this company. We didn't have any investments with a firm by that name. We didn't have any loans with them. I scrolled back further, my eyes scanning the dates. The payment started exactly 2 weeks after my boots hit the ground overseas. For 8 months, while I was eating MREs and sleeping on a cot, someone was draining $4,000 a month from my hard work. It was systematic. It was scheduled. It was deliberate. Someone was bleeding me dry, and they were using a corporate shell to hide exactly where the money was going. I needed to know who was behind Pinnacle Horizon. I closed my eyes, and a memory hit me like a physical blow. It was from a video call 3 months ago. Parisa had been in our living room, looking beautiful and happy. But in the background, walking through the hallway, I had seen a man. He was tall, fit, with dark hair. I had paused the conversation, confused. "Who is that?" I had asked. Parisa hadn't flinched. She laughed, a light, airy sound that usually made me smile. "Oh, that's just Renzo," she said casually. "He's my cousin's friend from the city. He's helping me move some heavy furniture into storage. You know, my back has been acting up." I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We had been married for 5 years. I let it go. I focused on her smile. Now looking at the empty bank account, that memory twisted in my gut like a knife. Renzo. The friend. The man helping her. The pieces were starting to click together, but I needed to be sure. I couldn't accuse my wife based on a gut feeling. I needed hard facts. I looked at the name Pinnacle Horizon LLC again. If there was a connection between the money and that man, I was going to find it. It was now 3 in the morning. My shift started in 4 hours, but sleep was impossible. I opened a new search tab and typed in Pinnacle Horizon LLC into the search bar. The satellite internet was agonizingly slow, the loading bar creeping across the screen pixel by pixel. Finally, the results popped up. It wasn't a mysterious shell company located overseas. It was a registered property management firm right in our hometown. I clicked on their portfolio page. They didn't own a dozen buildings. They owned exactly one high-end property, the Silo Luxury Lofts. I clicked the link. The website was filled with pictures of marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a rooftop infinity pool. I checked the pricing. The rent for a 2-bedroom unit started at exactly $3,950 a month. With fees, it would be right around $4,000. The math was perfect. Too perfect. My money wasn't being stolen by a hacker. It was paying rent. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the tent deafening. My combat pay wasn't paying off our mortgage. It was paying for a luxury apartment downtown. And I had a sickening suspicion about who was living there. I needed to see his face. I needed to know for sure that my money was funding him. I opened a new search tab and typed in Renzo, along with the name of our city. It didn't take long. His profile was public. I clicked on it, my pulse thumping in my ears like a drum. There were dozens of photos, but his profile picture made my blood run cold. It was a recent upload, dated 2 days ago. Renzo was standing on a glass balcony, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand, grinning like he owned the world. He looked relaxed, wealthy, and comfortable. Behind him, reflected clearly in the sliding glass door, was a distinct architectural logo, a stylized wheat stalk inside a circle. I switched tabs back to the Silo Luxury Lofts website. There it was. The exact same logo was plastered on their homepage banner. I zoomed in on Renzo's photo again. The view behind him showed the city skyline from a specific angle, the exact view advertised on the building's website. There was no doubt left. Renzo was living in the apartment my money was renting. Parisa wasn't just helping a friend move furniture. She was keeping him in luxury while I slept in the dirt. I sat back, staring at the screen until the pixels started to blur. The timeline was irrefutable. I had been deployed for 8 months. There were exactly 8 transfers of $4,000 to Pinnacle Horizon LLC. Every time I risked my life on a patrol, every time I earned my hazard pay, the money was instantly funneled into that apartment. The realization washed over me, but it wasn't hot, fiery rage. It was something scarier. It was a cold, absolute calm. This is what happens to soldiers in the field when the mission goes wrong. We don't panic. We assess the threat. We formulate a strategy. Parisa had turned our marriage into a financial crime. This wasn't just a domestic dispute or a broken heart. This was theft. She was using my legal power of attorney, a tool meant to protect our family, to fund her betrayal. If I called her now and screamed, she would just cover her tracks. She would delete the emails, close the accounts, and warn Renzo. I couldn't let that happen. I needed to be smarter. I needed to catch her in a way she couldn't lie her way out of. I needed a tactical advantage. I resisted the urge to pick up my phone. I didn't send a text. I didn't leave a voicemail. Instead, I closed the banking portal and opened my official military email. I had a top-secret security clearance. In the military, holding that clearance means you have to be financially stable. Debt or unexplained spending is a major security risk because it makes soldiers vulnerable to bribes. Technically, upon returning from a long deployment, I was eligible for a financial check-in. Usually soldiers skipped it or did the bare minimum. But I realized this was my weapon. If I requested a formal audit, it wouldn't be me asking Parisa where the money went. It would be the United States government asking her. I took a deep breath. This was the nuclear option. Once I started this process, there was no going back. But looking at Renzo's smiling face on that balcony, I knew I had no other choice. I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for my dignity. I began to type, my keystrokes loud and steady in the quiet tent. I addressed the email directly to my commanding officer. I kept the language formal and precise. I didn't mention the affair. I didn't mention Renzo. I stuck to the regulations. Sir, I typed. I am requesting to schedule a full financial audit immediately upon my return to base next week. Given the duration of my deployment and the volume of transactions, I want to ensure full compliance with my security clearance requirements. Then, I added the most important line. The trap. Per military regulations regarding power of attorney usage, I request that my wife, Parisa, be legally required to attend this audit. She has been managing the accounts in my absence, and her testimony is necessary to verify the expenditures. I hit send. By involving the chain of command, I was making Parisa's presence mandatory. She couldn't say no to a federal request without raising red flags. She would think it was just standard procedure, boring, annoying paperwork. She wouldn't suspect that I knew everything. I was luring her into a room where lying was a federal crime. The response came faster than I expected. My commanding officer was a by-the-book leader, and he appreciated soldiers who took their clearance seriously. The subject line popped up. Request approved. I opened the message. Good initiative, Master Sergeant, it read. I have flagged this for the Defense Investigative Service, DIS. A federal auditor has been assigned to your case to review the logs. We will schedule the meeting for 0900 hours on the day after you land. Your wife has been notified to bring all relevant financial records. I leaned back, the tension finally releasing from my shoulders. It was done. The gears were turning. A DIS auditor wasn't a bank teller. They were investigators trained to find fraud. Parisa would walk into that room expecting a welcome home formality. Instead, she was going to walk into an ambush. I closed my laptop and looked around the tent. The dust was still there, the air was still stale, but I felt different. I was ready to go home. The mission had changed. I wasn't just surviving the deployment anymore. I was preparing for the audit. I landed on American soil just as the sun was setting. The ride from the base to my house was a blur of highway lights and nervous energy. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same, but it felt entirely different. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a crime scene. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was cold. Parisa met me in the hallway. She gave me a hug, but it was thin and brief. She pulled away quickly, avoiding direct eye contact. You're back, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm so glad. Listen, I know you're tired, but the house has been a total nightmare while you were gone. Things kept breaking. The plumbing, the roof, it's been expensive. She was already laying the groundwork. She was planting the seeds to explain why the money was gone. And that audit thing tomorrow? She added, waving her hand dismissively. I know it's annoying, but I have it all under control. It's just a formality, right? I'll just show them the receipts for the repairs. She looked at me, waiting for reassurance. I kept my face like stone. Right, I said. Just a formality. Later that night, while I unpacked my bags in the bedroom, I heard the printer whirring down the hall in Parisa's home office. It had been running for 20 minutes. She wasn't sleeping. She was manufacturing evidence. I walked quietly down the hall and stopped just outside her open door. She was hunched over the desk, highlighting lines on a piece of paper. I leaned against the doorframe. Working late? I asked. She jumped, startled, and quickly covered the paper with her arm. Just organizing the bills for tomorrow, she stammered. Making sure everything is in order for the auditor. As she shuffled the papers, her arm moved, and I saw the header of the document she had just printed. It looked like a standard contractor's invoice. But the logo at the top caught my eye. It said Invoice, Pinnacle Roofing. My heart hardened. The real company was Pinnacle Horizon LLC, the property management firm. She had taken the name Pinnacle and digitally altered the document to make it look like a roofing company. She wasn't just spending the money. She was actively forging documents to hide the truth. I waited until Parisa finally went to bed. Once I heard her steady breathing, I went into my study and closed the door. I didn't need to forge anything. I just needed the truth. I opened my laptop and connected to the printer. I worked in silence, the only sound the rhythmic slide of paper coming out of the tray. First, I printed the official bank transfer logs showing the recurring $4,000 payments. Next, I printed the state registration documents for Pinnacle Horizon LLC, clearly identifying it as a property management firm, not a roofer. Then, I printed the leasing page for the silo lofts. Finally, I printed the screenshots I had taken of Renzo's social media, him on the balcony, the time stamps matching the dates of the money transfers. I organized everything neatly. I didn't use a flashy binder like Parisa. I placed every sheet of paper into a simple, black, government issue folder. It was thin, unassuming, and deadly. I placed it on the desk and stared at it. Inside that folder was the end of my marriage. I turned off the light and went to sleep on the couch. The next morning, the sun was bright, but the mood in the car was tense. We drove to the federal building in downtown. Parisa was dressed in her best business suit, clutching a bright red binder filled with her forged paperwork. She chattered nervously the whole way, talking about how we should go out for a nice dinner afterwards to celebrate my return. I just nodded, focusing on the road. We checked in at security and were escorted to a room on the 3rd floor. It was a sterile, gray room with no windows. A large American flag stood in the corner. Sitting behind a metal desk was Ms. Keller, the DIS auditor. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and zero humor in her eyes. She looked like she ate fraud for breakfast. "Master Sergeant." "Ma'am," Ms. Keller said, gesturing to the chairs. We sat down. Parisa placed her red binder on the table with a confident thud. She smiled at the auditor. "Hi. I have everything organized right here. I know you guys love paperwork." Ms. Keller didn't smile back. She just opened her file. Ms. Keller adjusted her glasses and looked down at a spreadsheet. The room was silent, save for the hum of the ventilation system. "Ma'am," she began, addressing Parisa directly. "Let's start with the largest recurring outflow. I see a monthly debit of $4,000 initiated on the 1st of every month." She looked up. "Can you explain the nature of this expense?" Parisa didn't hesitate. She let out a dramatic, rehearsed sigh. "Oh, the roof. A total disaster. A leak started in the master bedroom, and the contractor said the whole thing needed to be replaced. It was an emergency." She opened her red binder and pulled out the paper I had seen her printing the night before. "Here is the invoice," Parisa said, sliding the document across the table. It was a 24-month payment plan with Pinnacle Roofing. "That $4,000 is the monthly installment." She looked at me, then back at the auditor, her face the picture of innocent frustration. "Home ownership, right? It's always something." She had committed to the lie. There was no going back now. Ms. Keller picked up the invoice Parisa had slid across the table. She held it by the corner, as if it were something dirty. She stared at it for a long, uncomfortable minute. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Parisa kept her smile plastered on her face, but I saw a bead of sweat trickle down her temple. She was waiting for the auditor to nod and file it away. Ms. Keller didn't file it away. She pulled out a calculator. She punched in a few numbers, the keys clicking loudly in the silence. Then, she took off her glasses and looked directly at me. "Master Sergeant," she said, her voice dry. "Your home record indicates you live in a standard 3-bedroom suburban house. Is that correct?" I nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She gestured to the paper. "Because according to this payment plan, you are paying nearly $96,000 for a roof replacement. That is the price of a small house, not a roof." The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. Parisa's smile twitched. "Well," Parisa stammered, "it was high-end materials. Imported slate. Very durable." I didn't let Parisa finish her lie about imported slate. I knew the moment had arrived. I reached into my bag and pulled out the plain black government issue folder I had prepared the night before. The sound of it hitting the metal table echoed like a gunshot. Parisa jumped slightly. She stared at the folder, her eyes widening. She had never seen it before. "Ma'am," I said to Ms. Keller, keeping my voice perfectly level. "With all due respect, my wife is mistaken. There is no new roof on our house. The shingles are 10 years old and perfectly fine." I placed my hand on the folder. That $4,000 a month did not go to a roofing contractor, and it certainly didn't go to home repairs. I slid the folder across the table to the auditor, bypassing Parisa completely. Parisa reached out as if to stop it, but she pulled her hand back at the last second. "Torin," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes locked on the auditor. "I think you'll find the contents of that folder much more interesting than a fake invoice." Ms. Keller opened the black folder. The first document on top was the state registration I had printed. "Pinnacle Horizon LLC," I said, pointing to the paper. "As you can see from the state registry I pulled last night, this is not a roofing company. It is a property management firm." Parisa's face drained of all color. She looked like a ghost. "Torin, wait," she breathed, but I ignored her. "They manage exactly one building," I continued, pointing to the next page in the folder. It was the glossy printout of the luxury apartment building downtown. The silo lofts. That money was rent. Ms. Keller looked from the document to Parisa, her expression shifting from skepticism to cold judgment. She saw the matching names. She saw the amounts. "So," Ms. Keller said, her voice sharp, "we are looking at rental payments for a luxury apartment disguised as home maintenance." Parisa opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The trap had snapped shut. It gets worse, I said. I reached over and flipped to the next page in the folder. It was the photo of Renzo, the one where he was smiling on the balcony, holding his drink, with the city skyline behind him. This is Renzo, I said. The name tasted bitter in my mouth. My wife told me he was a friend of a cousin. She said he was helping her move furniture. I tapped the photo, but as you can see, the logo on the glass door behind him matches the logo for the silo lofts. And the timestamp on this photo, it matches the 3rd month of the transfers. I looked at Parisa for the first time since we entered the room. She hasn't been fixing our roof, ma'am. She has been funding her lover's lifestyle. My hazard pay meant for our future was used to pay for his view of the city. Ms. Keller stared at the photo. The evidence was irrefutable. It wasn't just numbers anymore. It was a picture of the betrayal. The silence in the room was shattered by Parisa's voice. It wasn't the confident tone she had used earlier. It was high-pitched and frantic. No. You have it all wrong. She stood up halfway, then sat back down, her hands shaking. Renzo is just a friend. A close friend. He was struggling, Torin. He was going to be homeless. She looked at Ms. Keller, her eyes pleading. I was just helping him get back on his feet. It was a loan. I intended to pay it all back to the joint account before Torin got home. It's not what it looks like. A $96,000 loan? Ms. Keller asked, her eyebrow raised. Hidden under a fake roofing invoice? That doesn't look like a loan, Mrs. Parisa. That looks like embezzlement. Parisa scrambled for words, but she was drowning. I didn't want Torin to worry while he was deployed. I was protecting him. The excuse was so we could hang in the air like a bad smell. She wasn't protecting me. She was protecting herself. Ms. Keller didn't yell. She didn't slam her hand on the desk. Instead, her face turned into absolute granite. She held up a single hand, silencing Parisa's frantic excuses about loans and helping friends. The room went dead quiet. Ma'am, Ms. Keller said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously low. I want you to listen very carefully to my next question. It is a question for the official record. She tapped her pen on the desk. Are you, right now, admitting that you knowingly misappropriated funds belonging to a deployed United States service member to pay for the living expenses of a third party? Parisa froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at me, desperate for me to intervene, to save her like I always did. But I sat like a statue. I wasn't her husband in that moment. I was a witness. She looked back at the auditor. I didn't mean to steal it, she whispered, tears finally spilling over. I thought I could put it back. It was the closest thing to a confession she was going to give. Ms. Keller nodded slowly. She had heard enough. Parisa sat slumped in her chair, her face ashen gray. She looked small. The confidence of the woman who had walked in with a bright red binder was completely gone. She still didn't understand the gravity of what she had done. She thought this was a marital dispute that could be fixed with an apology. Mrs. Parisa, Ms. Keller said, leaning forward. I don't think you understand the position you are in. You didn't just spend your husband's money. You abused a power of attorney granting access to federal military pay. Keller pulled a thick book of regulations from the side of her desk. Under the Uniform Power of Attorney Act, and given the source of these funds, this falls under federal jurisdiction. Misappropriating these assets is a federal crime. Parisa's eyes went wide with genuine terror. She looked at the fake invoice on the table. But it was just rent, she squeaked. It's fraud, Keller corrected her. You falsified documents to cover up the theft of government-dispersed funds. That is not a mistake. That is a deliberate criminal act. Ms. Keller reached over and pressed a button on her desk phone. She spoke 2 words into the receiver, send them. She hung up and turned her attention to the computer screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard. We are done here, Keller announced. She looked at me. Master Sergeant, as of this moment, your wife's power of attorney is legally void. I am placing an immediate freeze on the joint account. She hit the enter key with a definitive click. Furthermore, she continued, I am initiating a full federal clawback procedure against Pinnacle Horizon LLC. Because these funds were obtained via fraud, we have the authority to reclaim the last 8 payments directly from the merchant. She looked at me with a rare, faint smile. That means the landlord is going to lose his money, and your wife's friend will likely be evicted by the end of the week. The recovered funds will be redirected to a new, private account in your name only. You will get every cent back. Before Parisa could process that her lover was about to be homeless, the heavy door behind us opened. 2 men in dark suits walked in. They didn't look like auditors. They looked like law enforcement. They were Defense Criminal Investigative Service, CIS, agents. Parisa gasped, pulling her hands into her chest. Ms. Keller stood up. She looked at me and nodded respectfully. Sergeant, you are dismissed. Your finances are secure. Welcome home. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in months. Keller turned her gaze to Parisa, who was shaking in her chair. Ma'am, Keller said, her voice cold. These gentlemen have a few questions regarding the forged Pinnacle Roofing invoices you presented to a federal official today. That constitutes a separate offense. She pointed to the door. I strongly suggest you call a lawyer. Parisa looked at me, her eyes pleading one last time. Torin, don't leave me. The agent stepped forward, blocking her view of me. I didn't say a word. I simply picked up my black government issue folder from the table. It was the only thing I needed. I turned my back on the woman I had married, the woman who had sold our future for a downtown view. I walked to the door. As my hand touched the handle, I heard it, the first real, gut-wrenching sob from Parisa. It wasn't the fake cry of a victim. It was the sound of someone who realized they had lost everything. I didn't look back. I didn't hesitate. I stepped out of the gray, sterile office and walked down the long hallway. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the federal building and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. The air smelled clean. The noise of the city surrounded me, but for the first time in 8 months, my mind was quiet. The money was safe. The truth was out. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh air of home. I got justice.